looking at this as black and white. It's not government is bad or government is good. It's always both, right? There are some things that work really well in the government. When we have natural disasters, who do we turn to? We all count on FEMA. And we see that with Hurricane Irene, things turned out much better than they did with Hurricane Katrina, right? So we really do care about the federal government doing things for us.
Oh,
but
definitely.
there are some ways in which it's not as efficient as it should be, and we can improve it. It's not just good and bad, black and white.
That's very true. I mean, as we go further, I mean, Rick Perry is not end-all solution to our problem. I am sure a lot of people will contribute ideas, and that's why a campaign is successful when it listens to the public. The only thing I say is once you make a manifesto, you act on it if you get elected, not just sit back and then go back to your party and do the party politics. You know, president is supposed to be above the politics once elected.
Check out this headline from the New York Times, Reaping the Rewards of Risk-Taking. This article is about none other than Steve Jobs. Of course, everybody's been talking about him over the past week or so since he has resigned from his position as chief executive at Apple. And now kind of looking back at his career and all of his contributions, the one word you can really associate with Steve Jobs is innovator. This is a person who was willing to take risks and to go out on a limb to try something new. Now, a lot of different countries are trying to invest in innovation, right? It's a catchy word.
Yes.
Everybody wants to invent and be leaders in innovation, and the raw materials for that would include things like government financing for scientific research, national policies that support emerging industries. But you need more than that, right? You need more than the financing and more than the policies. You need a social environment that encourages diversity. And that's what we have here in the U.S.
We certainly don't have Steve Jobs in the government. I can tell you that. Not in this Congress or the Senate.
That's true.
Or not even the president.
You know, you want an environment that encourages diversity, risk-taking, combining skills from many fields. I was interested in learning that Steve Jobs actually, after he dropped out of college, did the very typical baby boomer thing of going to India to search for spiritual salvation or understanding, enlightenment, and then came back to Silicon Valley after that trip to India to found Apple with his friend Steve Wozniak. Now, we also know that Steve Jobs actually left Apple. He was forced out of Apple, I should say, in 1985, and there was this gap. He didn't come back until 1996. That's when he got new insights, starting up other companies, and really he credits that experience for all of the wonderful things he did when he came back to Apple.
Right. You know, one of the things that he got when he came back to Apple was monarchy. You know, I mean, he was not only the CEO, he was the CTO general. I mean, he was the one, it was his ideas, and they gave birth to all of these gadgets. And he could still continue on because he's still the chairman of the board of Apple. He will stay there. And I really wish God gives him a few years at the helm of the United States government. He can bring that innovation here. You know, jobs have really vanished from the United States of America. We don't have much mining going on here. But mining is in Australia, folks, and they have lots of jobs. Lots of jobs. They'll pay you as much as $2,200 a week to $5,000 a week if you're an electrician, if you're a plumber, if you're a good welder, and laborers even, and so on and so forth. There's one problem.
What's that?
There are not enough women in those places. 23 males to 1 female.
Really?
Oh, it is so hard on them, the companies. They can't seem to be able to recruit them. But, you know, in Australia, prostitution is legal. So some of the bars, you know, they are importing women from Ireland, from some of the other countries. They're not going for getting them from Manila or India or otherwise. They want European women up in Australia. And, of course, it's legal. So, folks, the jobs are going for begging in Australia, particularly if you're an electrician, a plumber, a good laborer, $5,000 a week, I think that's an enough incentive.
Well, I mean, clearly there's a big gender gap there. It would be nice to see if some of those other professions could also have women working there, but there's probably some gap also in terms of who applies for those jobs and then, you know, who gets hired.
I remember a few years ago when Alaska was going great, there were just so many jobs in Alaska paying very high salary, and they had the same situation in Alaska, that there were not enough women. And they, again, people are very lonely there, and that's why so many people just have a problem with the psychology and all of that.
You know, this reminds me of this piece that I read in the Washington Post about women in the computer science industry. And the title of this article is When Computer Programming Was Women's Work. Now, today, we're all excited that, you know, we're applauding this figure that about 25% of computer programmers are women. But if you think about it, that's not a very high number.
That's right.
Did you know that the peak was actually back in 1984 when 37% of the people working in the computer field were women? So it's actually gone down since then and then kind of come back up. It dropped down to 20% and now it's come back up to 25%. But I found that to be really interesting.
Oh, you know, there are more women are going to college these days. 57% on any college campus are women, only 43% men. And they are really getting into it because, you know, I keep hearing you have to outsource this mathematics and science because Americans are not. I say it's baloney, you know. I mean, women are really getting into it, and they should be the one to bring the jobs back home.
Well, you know, it's interesting because, you know, you just said more than half of American college students are women, but we're only talking about a quarter of the people working in the computer programming field being women. So there's a big gap there, and it's has something to do with what people think they're qualified for when they apply for jobs. One of the examples from this article was that women majoring in computer science often don't think that they are qualified for opportunities that are using very highly competitive language to describe the job. They think that's for somebody else. I'm not qualified. So they almost downplay their skills more often than men do and don't kind of take that risk because they think that they don't have the qualifications, and so they don't want to assume it. You know, there was a slogan, "We help the world's best developers make better software." And some of the research was indicating that female candidates sometimes would hear the phrase "best developers" and think, that's not me, that's some guy. So there's a psychological component to this too, and a social one, that why women don't necessarily